The gunshot cracked through the silent dawn like thunder, jolting Fiona Reynolds awake as her stagecoach careened wildly off the trail. Clutching her weathered carpetbag, she braced herself against the wooden frame as the driver shouted frantically above. It was 1876 in the untamed Arizona Territory, and this wasn't how she'd planned to begin her escape. Outlaws, the driver bellowed as another shot rang out. Everybody down. The stagecoach lurched violently before tipping onto its side, sending Fiona tumbling against the elderly gentleman seated across from her. Pain shot through her shoulder as she hit the door, now beneath her. The gentleman helped her up with shaking hands. "Stay low, miss," he whispered, his gray mustache quivering with fear. Outside, horses' hooves pounded the dusty earth, circling like predators. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the small Derringer pistol hidden in her skirt pocket, a parting gift from her father before she'd fled St. Louis 3 days ago. "Come out nice and easy," a gruff voice commanded. "Hand over your valuables and nobody gets hurt." The coach door above them was wrenched open, revealing a bearded face shadowed beneath a dirty hat. Sunlight poured in, temporarily blinding Fiona as rough hands reached down. Well, what do we have here?" the outlaw sneered, yanking the elderly man up first. Fiona gripped her pistol, wondering if this was how her journey would end before it had truly begun. She'd escaped one life of confinement only to die in another. The irony wasn't lost on her. But just as the outlaw reached for her, a volley of gunfire erupted from beyond the coach. The man jerked backward with a startled cry. Outside, chaos ensued, horses whinnying in panic, men shouting, more gunshots echoing across the open desert. "You folks all right in there?" a deep voice called moments later. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered and backlit by the morning sun. Fiona squinted up at her apparent savior, still clutching her Derringer. "Madam," the silhouette extended a hand. "It's safe now." When Fiona finally emerged from the overturned stagecoach, she found herself staring into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man perhaps 5 years her senior, his face weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way that seemed perfectly suited to the vast landscape surrounding them. "Kenton Wade," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his Stetson. "Ranch foreman at the Crossfire, about 20 miles east of here." He glanced at the 3 dead outlaws lying in the dirt. "Seems you folks ran into the Harlan gang. They've been terrorizing these parts for months." The stagecoach driver was binding a wound on his arm, while the other passengers, the elderly gentleman and a young mother with her child, gathered their scattered belongings. "Fiona Reynolds," she replied, brushing dust from her traveling dress. "I appreciate your timely intervention, Mr. Wade." His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. "Where you headed, Miss Reynolds?" "Tucson," she answered, offering no elaboration. The less anyone knew about her circumstances, the better. "Well, this coach won't be going anywhere," Kenton said, gesturing to the broken axle. "But my men and I can escort you all to the Crossfire. The ranch owner, Mrs. Abernathy, is hospitable to travelers. You can rest there until the next stage comes through in 3 days." Fiona's stomach tightened. 3 more days delayed was 3 days her stepfather's men might catch up to her. Ever since her mother's death, Xavier Fleming had made his intentions clear. He would have Fiona as his wife, willing or not. Her substantial inheritance made her a prize worth pursuing across the country. "I need to reach Tucson as soon as possible," she said firmly. Kenton studied her with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through her carefully constructed facade. "Running from something, Miss Reynolds," her spine stiffened. "My business is my own, Mr. Wade." A hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "Fair enough. But the desert between here and Tucson isn't forgiving to lone travelers. You'd be wise to wait for the stage." The driver approached, cradling his injured arm. "Mr. Wade is right, miss. Even if we could fix the coach, we've lost 2 horses. We'll need to wait for the relief stage." Fiona sighed, conceding defeat for the moment. "Very well." As the small party mounted up, Fiona sharing a horse with the young mother while her child rode with Kenton, she couldn't help feeling as though she'd just stepped from one trap into another. The vastness of the Arizona desert stretched around her, beautiful and deadly. much like the man who rode ahead, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. The Crossfire Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, nestled between rugged mesas, an oasis in the desert with grazing cattle, well-tended fields, and a main house that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. Mrs. Abernathy, a silver-haired widow with shrewd eyes and a warm smile, welcomed the stranded travelers with genuine hospitality. "You poor dears," she said, ushering them into the cool interior of her home. "Kenton, have Rosa prepare rooms. These folks look dead on their feet." Fiona found herself installed in a comfortable bedroom with clean linens and a washstand luxuries she hadn't expected to find in the wilds of Arizona Territory. After washing away the dust of travel, she changed into her spare dress and ventured downstairs, where the aroma of cooking filled the air. In the dining room, she found her fellow passengers already seated around a large oak table. Kenton Wade stood by the window, deep in conversation with Mrs. Abernathy. When Fiona entered, he turned, and their eyes met briefly before she looked away. "Miss Reynolds, Mrs. Abernathy called, come sit. You must be famished." Dinner was a hearty affair of beef stew, fresh bread, and vegetables from Mrs. Abernathy's garden. As they ate, Fiona learned that the elderly gentleman, Mr. Patterson, was traveling to Tucson to live with his daughter after his wife's passing. The young mother, Sarah, and her 4-year-old son, Timothy, were joining her husband who had established a carpentry business there. Each had a destination, a purpose. Only Fiona kept her reasons guarded. "And what takes you to Tucson, Miss Reynolds, Mrs. Abernathy asked, passing a basket of bread. Fiona had prepared for such questions. "I'm to take a position as a schoolteacher there." "A noble profession," Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "We could use a good teacher here at Crossfire. The children have to ride 10 miles to the nearest school." "Fiona's not staying a leaner," Kenton said quietly, his eyes on his plate. "She's in quite a hurry to reach Tucson." The slight emphasis he placed on her first name didn't escape Fiona's notice, nor did the underlying question in his tone. "Some opportunities won't wait, Mr. Wade," she replied evenly. After dinner, while the others retired to their rooms, Fiona stepped onto the wide veranda that wrapped around the house. The night air carried the scent of sage and dust, and a million stars glittered overhead in a way they never had in St. Louis. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe in the vastness, the freedom. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Kenton's voice came from the shadows, startling her. He moved to lean against the railing beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and the faintest hint of tobacco. "It is," she admitted. "Different from what I'm accustomed to." "And what are you accustomed to, Miss Reynolds, besides running from your past?" Fiona's jaw tightened. "You presume too much, Mr. Wade." "Do I?" He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I've been foreman here for 8 years. Seen all types come through prospectors, gamblers, gunfighters, and people running from something. They all have the same look in their eyes." "And what look is that?" "Like they're always watching the horizon behind them," he said softly. "Like they're never quite in the present moment." His perception unsettled her. "You're very observant for a cowboy." A smile crept across his face. "And you're very guarded for a schoolteacher." They stood in silence for a long moment, the night sounds of the desert filling the space between them. "Whatever you're running from," Kenton finally said, "it might follow you to Tucson." Fiona's hands gripped the railing. "That's my concern, not yours." "True enough." He pushed away from the railing. "But if you need help, Miss Reynolds, you need only ask." As he walked away, Fiona called after him. "Why would you help a stranger?" Kenton paused at the door, his silhouette framed against the warm light from inside. "Some people are worth helping, even if they are strangers." Then he was gone, leaving Fiona alone with the stars and her troubled thoughts. That night, Fiona slept fitfully, dreams of Xavier Fleming's cold eyes and grasping hands mingling with images of open deserts and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see too much. She woke before dawn, a plan forming in her mind. The stable was quiet as she slipped inside, a small bundle of her possessions clutched to her chest. If she could borrow a horse, get a head start toward Tucson, perhaps she could reach a telegraph office and wire ahead to her aunt's friend who had arranged the teaching position. Going somewhere. Fiona spun around to find Kenton leaning against a stall door, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't wearing his hat, and his dark hair fell across his forehead, making him look younger. "I can't wait 3 days," she said, deciding honesty was her only option. "It's too risky. Risky enough to ride alone through Apache territory, with bandits like the ones who attacked your stage." He shook his head. "That's not courage, Miss Reynolds, that's foolishness. You don't understand what's at stake." "Then help me understand." He stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Who are you running from?" Fiona hesitated, weighing her options. This man was a stranger, yet he'd already saved her life once. Something in his steady gaze made her want to trust him, against all her better judgment. "My stepfather," she finally said. "He intends to force me into marriage. After my mother died, he learned I'd inherited a considerable sum. A marriage would give him control of that money." Kenton's expression darkened. "And the law won't protect you. He's a powerful man in St. Louis, well-connected. When I refused him, he threatened to have me committed to an asylum for female hysteria if I didn't comply." She swallowed hard. "I had to leave. My aunt's friend in Tucson offered me a teaching position and a chance at a new life. And your stepfather is pursuing you. He sent men after me. I've been careful, using different names at hotels, traveling on different coaches than planned. But I've had the feeling of being watched since Denver." Kenton was quiet for a long moment. 3 days isn't so long," he finally said, "and you'll be safer here than on the trail alone." "You don't know these men, maybe not," he cut in, "but I know this territory. And I know that if anyone comes looking for you here, they'll have to deal with me first." The fierce protectiveness in his voice caught her off guard. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You don't even know me." Something flickered in his eyes, a vulnerability at odds with his strong exterior. "Let's just say I understand what it means to seek a fresh start." He extended his hand. "Come back inside, Miss Reynolds. I give you my word you'll be safe here." Against her better judgment, Fiona took his hand, allowing him to lead her back toward the house as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. The next 2 days at Crossfire Ranch passed with surprising swiftness. Mrs. Abernathy put her guests to work. "Idle hands make for restless minds," she declared. And Fiona found herself helping in the kitchen garden, learning to make sourdough bread, and even assisting with the ranch ledgers when Mrs. Abernathy discovered her facility with numbers. "You have a good head for business," the older woman remarked, "rare in a young woman these days." "My father was a banker," Fiona explained. "He believed daughters should be as educated as sons. A wise man. Did he pass recently? 5 years ago. My mother remarried last year and followed him to the grave within months." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Mrs. Abernathy's shrewd eyes studied her. "Kenton mentioned you're in some trouble. If you need a place to stay longer than a few days, you're welcome here." The offer was tempting, more tempting than Fiona wanted to admit. In just 2 days, she'd grown fond of the ranch and its mistress. And then, there was Kenton Wade, who seemed to appear whenever she turned around, offering quiet assistance or engaging her in conversations that ranged from books to politics, to the best way to predict rain in the desert. His intelligence surprised her, as did his gentle manner with Timothy, the young boy who followed him everywhere. He was nothing like the rough cowboys she'd encountered on her journey west, men who leered and made crude comments. Kenton treated her with a respect that seemed as natural to him as breathing. On the second evening, she found him on the veranda again, whittling a small wooden horse. "For Timothy," he explained when she sat beside him. "Something to remember the ranch by. That's thoughtful of you." She watched his hands as they shaped the wood with practiced strokes. "You're good with him. Kids are easy. They say what they mean and mean what they say." He glanced at her. "Adults are the complicated ones." "Some complications are necessary," she countered. "The world isn't always kind to those who speak their minds too freely." "True enough." He set aside his carving, "but there's something to be said for honesty between people who trust each other." Their eyes met, and Fiona felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. This man, with his directness and quiet strength, was becoming dangerous to her in ways Xavier Fleming could never be. He threatened not her safety but her determination to rely on no one but herself. Mrs. Abernathy offered to let me stay, she said, breaking the moment. After the stage comes. Something like hope flickered across his face. And will you? I can't. The teaching position is waiting, and staying in one place too long is risky. Running forever is no kind of life, Fiona. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. Sometimes it's the only life available, he shook his head. There are always choices, including the choice to stand and fight. Easy for a man to say, she replied with a hint of bitterness. The law favors your kind in these matters. Then we find ways around the law. His intensity surprised her. If this stepfather of yours comes looking, he'll find more than he bargained for. I won't have you risking yourself for my problems. Kenton's laugh was soft and without humor. That's not your decision to make. Some things are worth fighting for. The way he looked at her then made her heart skip a beat. There was something in his eyes, a tenderness mixed with determination that made her wonder if he was still talking about her stepfather at all. Before she could respond, the dinner bell rang from inside the house, breaking the spell between them. As they rose to go in, Kenton touched her arm lightly. Just consider staying, he said quietly. That's all I ask. The third day dawned clear and hot, the kind of heat that shimmered above the distant mesas like water. Fiona rose early, packing her few belongings with methodical care. The stage would arrive by noon, and by nightfall she would be in Tucson, putting another 50 miles between herself and St. Louis, and between herself and Kenton Wade. She pushed away the pang of regret that accompanied the thought. Attachments were dangerous. She'd learned that lesson from her mother, who had married Xavier Fleming out of loneliness after Fiona's father died, only to wither away under his controlling hand. A commotion in the yard drew her to the window. Riders were approaching 5 men on horseback, moving with purpose. Even from a distance, something about them raised the hairs on the back of her neck. They weren't ranch hands or local farmers. They wore Eastern-style clothing, dusty from travel. Her heart sank. Somehow they'd found her. Fiona grabbed her carpetbag and the derringer, then slipped into the hallway. She needed to get away before they reached the house, before anyone at the ranch got hurt because of her. She was halfway down the back stairs when she heard Mrs. Abernathy's voice from the front parlor, steely with suspicion. State your business, gentlemen. We're looking for a young woman. A familiar voice replied Wilson, her stepfather's chief enforcer. Fiona Reynolds, we have reason to believe she passed this way. And what business do you have with this young woman? Mrs. Abernathy's tone revealed nothing. Family business. Her stepfather is concerned for her welfare. She's not well, you see, prone to flights of fancy and hysteria. Fiona's hands clenched around the banister. The familiar lies turned her stomach. I see, Mrs. Abernathy said coolly. And you have proof of your claims, documentation of your authority to retrieve her. There was a pause, then the rustle of paper. A letter from her doctor and a statement from her stepfather, who is her legal guardian. These look very official, Mrs. Abernathy conceded. However, I'm afraid I can't help you. No one by that name has been here. Madam, we tracked her to a stagecoach that was attacked 3 days ago. The driver confirmed she was brought here. The driver was mistaken. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have ranch business to attend to. We'll need to search the premises. You most certainly will not. Mrs. Abernathy's voice hardened. This is private property. Fiona heard the scrape of boots on the wooden floor. We don't want trouble, madam, but we will find her. With or without your cooperation. Is there a problem here? Kenton's voice entered the conversation, deceptively calm but with an underlying edge that Fiona recognized as dangerous. These men were just leaving, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. Not without Fiona Reynolds, Wilson insisted. If you're harboring her, you're interfering with family matters. Family matters, Kenton's tone was skeptical. Strange kind of family that sends armed men to drag a woman back against her will. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Anyone threatening Mrs. Abernathy on her own property concerns me very much. The subtle shift in Kenton's voice made Fiona picture his hand moving closer to his gun. This was exactly what she'd feared, confrontation that could lead to violence. These men wouldn't hesitate to kill Kenton, Mrs. Abernathy, or anyone else who stood in their way. Before she could think better of it, Fiona descended the remaining stairs and stepped into the parlor. That's enough, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm the one you want. 5 heads turned toward her. Wilson's thin lips curved in a smile that never reached his cold eyes. Miss Reynolds, your stepfather will be relieved to know you're safe. I doubt that very much, she replied, since my safety has never been his concern. Wilson's smile faded. You're overwrought as usual, Mr. Fleming has only your best interests at heart. My best interests or my inheritance. She looked at the other men, hired guns, not family friends. Does he pay you well to kidnap innocent women, or is it just the enjoyment of bullying that attracts you to this work? Wilson's face hardened. That's enough. Get your things. We're leaving. She's not going anywhere with you, Kenton said, moving to stand between Fiona and the intruders. This is none of your concern, Wilson snapped. She's a sick woman under the legal guardianship of her stepfather. She seems perfectly sound to me, Kenton replied, and I don't see any lawman among you with the authority to take her. Wilson's hand moved toward his jacket, where Fiona knew he kept a small pistol. We have all the authority we need. The parlor door opened again, and 2 ranch hands entered, rifles in hand. They positioned themselves behind Mrs. Abernathy, their expressions making it clear they wouldn't tolerate threats to their employer. I suggest you gentlemen leave, Mrs. Abernathy said calmly. Before this situation becomes unnecessarily unpleasant, Wilson assessed the room, clearly calculating odds. This isn't over. Mr. Fleming will involve the proper authorities. By all means, Kenton said. I'm sure the territorial marshal would be very interested to hear how you attempted to remove a woman from this ranch by force. With a final glare, Wilson backed toward the door, his men following. We'll be watching, Miss Reynolds. The moment you leave this ranch, we'll be there. When they had gone, Mrs. Abernathy sank into a chair. Charming friends you have, my dear. Fiona's legs felt suddenly weak. I'm so sorry to have brought this trouble to your door. This is exactly what I feared. Kenton was watching through the window as the men mounted their horses. They're heading toward town, but they won't go far. Wilson was right about one thing they'll be watching. Then I've just traded one prison for another, Fiona said bitterly. I can't stay here indefinitely, and I can't leave without them following. You could marry, Mrs. Abernathy suggested bluntly. A husband's rights would supersede a stepfather's guardianship. Fiona stared at her. Marry, I came west to escape one forced marriage, not to enter another out of desperation. Who said anything about force? Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled with mischief. Or desperation, for that matter. Her meaningful glance between Fiona and Kenton made Fiona's cheeks burn. That's absurd. Mr. Wade and I hardly know each other. Sometimes a few days tells you more about a person's character than years of acquaintance, Mrs. Abernathy replied. But it was merely a suggestion. Kenton had remained silent during this exchange, his expression unreadable. Now he turned from the window. Eleanor, would you give us a moment? Mrs. Abernathy rose with a knowing smile. Of course, I'll just make sure those men have truly departed. When they were alone, Kenton approached Fiona, his eyes serious. You know she's right. It would solve your legal problems. Marriage is a rather extreme solution to being followed, she replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the rapid beating of her heart. Is it? He took her hands in his, and she was surprised by their warmth. Fiona, I've known since the moment I pulled you from that stagecoach that you were different, special. You can't possibly. I can, he interrupted gently. Some things don't need years to develop, sometimes you just know. The earnestness in his eyes made her breath catch. This is madness, maybe. His smile was soft, but I'd rather be mad with you than sensible without you. You don't know what you're offering, she protested. I have nothing but trouble to bring you. You have courage, intelligence, and a spirit that refuses to be broken. That's worth any amount of trouble. His hands tightened around hers. I'm not proposing out of pity or duty, Fiona. I'm proposing because in 3 days you've made me see possibilities I'd stopped looking for. Fiona searched his face, looking for signs of insincerity or ulterior motive. She found only openness and a vulnerability that matched her own. What if it doesn't work? She whispered. What if it does? He countered. I'm not promising perfect happiness. I'm promising to stand beside you, to fight for you, to build something real with you. His voice dropped lower. I'm promising to follow you to the ends of the earth if that's what it takes to keep you safe. Something inside Fiona, a wall she'd built around her heart after her father's death, reinforced after her mother's began to crumble. This man, this cowboy with his direct gaze and quiet strength, was offering her something she'd never expected to find in her desperate flight west. A partnership based on respect and genuine affection. "This is insane," she said, but she was smiling now, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Most of the best things in life are," he replied, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "I don't even know if I love you," she admitted. "Do you think you could, given time?" She considered the question seriously, thinking of his kindness to Timothy, his protectiveness toward Mrs. Abernathy, his respect for her own independence. "Yes," she finally said. "I think I could very easily." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's enough for me to start with." Before she could respond, hoofbeats sounded in the yard again, not the return of Wilson and his men, but the arrival of the stagecoach that would take her to Tucson. Kenton glanced toward the window, then back at her, his eyes questioning. "It's your choice, Fiona. It always has been." In that moment, Fiona Reynolds faced the most important decision of her life. She could continue running, forever looking over her shoulder, starting a new life alone in Tucson. Or she could take a leap of faith with this man who had already risked himself for her, who promised not to cage her but to stand beside her. "If we do this," she said slowly, "it has to be real, not just a legal arrangement." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he assured her. "And I need to teach. I've worked too hard for my education to become just a rancher's wife. The children around here need a teacher," he reminded her. "Mrs. Abernathy has been saying so for years." Fiona took a deep breath, releasing years of fear and caution with it. "Then yes, Kenton Wade. I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such joy that it banished her last doubts. He pulled her gently into his arms, and when his lips met hers, Fiona felt like she was finally coming home after a long journey. Outside, the stagecoach driver called for passengers, but inside the parlor of Crossfire Ranch, Fiona and Kenton remained in their embrace, beginning a journey of a different kind, one they would travel together. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Fiona Wade stood on the veranda of the small house Kenton had built for them on the eastern edge of Crossfire Ranch. The fall breeze carried the scent of sage, and the distant lowing of cattle being moved to winter pastures. In her hand was a letter from St. Louis, not from Xavier Fleming, whose influence had been effectively countered by a strongly worded letter from the territorial judge, a personal friend of Mrs. Abernathy's, informing him that his former stepdaughter was now legally married and beyond his reach. This letter was from her mother's sister, confirming that Fleming had finally given up his pursuit and moved on to another wealthy widow. Fiona was free, truly free for the first time in years. "Good news?" Kenton asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. His chin rested on her shoulder as he peered at the letter. "The best," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Fleming has abandoned his claim on me, and my aunt has transferred the remainder of my inheritance to the bank in Tucson." "So you're a wealthy woman now," he teased, pressing a kiss to her neck. "We are comfortable," she corrected. "The money will fund the school we're building." The Territorial Education Board had approved their proposal for a proper schoolhouse to serve the children of Crossfire and neighboring ranches. Construction would begin in the spring, with Fiona as headmistress. "Speaking of the school," Kenton said, turning her in his arms, "Mrs. Abernathy has donated more books for the library. They're in town waiting to be picked up." "Then we should ride in today." Fiona smiled up at him. In 3 months of marriage, her feelings for this man had only deepened. What had begun as gratitude and tentative affection had blossomed into genuine love, a partnership that strengthened them both. "I was thinking we might stay the night at the hotel," he suggested, his blue eyes twinkling with mischief. "Celebrate your good news properly." Fiona laughed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Mr. Wade, are you trying to scandalize the good people of Silverton with passionate displays of affection for your wife?" "Absolutely." His arms tightened around her. "Every chance I get." As they prepared to ride into town, Fiona thought about how far she had come from the terrified young woman who had fled St. Louis, convinced she would spend her life running. She had found not just safety but love, purpose, and a home in this wild, beautiful country. And in the man who had promised to follow her to the ends of the earth, but who had instead given her a reason to stay.